Okay, you are recording, Chair.
All right, it is 3:30 p.m. on October 30th, 2024, and call the meeting of the Municipality of Anchorage's Board of Ethics to order. Ms. Sleppy, would you please call roll?
Yes, Mr. Bellerive,
Present.
Mr. Teagarden,
Here.
Mr. Neighbors,
Here.
and I believe Mrs. Moggatan was excused. Is that correct, Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Right, Chair, you have a quorum.
All right, next item we have on the agenda this evening is the approval of today's agenda, and the board would entertain a motion.
So moved. Second.
All right, and all those in favor of approving today's agenda, say aye.
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 And with none opposed, the motion carries, and this evening's agenda is approved. Next item we have for consideration is the approval of the minutes of the previous meetings. Up first, we have minutes of the September 19th, 2024 meeting, and the board would entertain a motion.
So moved. Second.
And is there any discussion on the minutes for the September 19th, 2024 meeting? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the minutes of the September 19th meeting. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And with none opposed, the minutes of the September 19th meeting are adopted. And our next item is the adoption of the minutes for the October 3rd, 2024 meeting.
So moved. Second.
And any discussion? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the minutes of the October 3rd meeting. All those in favor say aye.
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 And the motion carries. Next item on our agenda this afternoon is our consent agenda. We have what appears to be 3 disclosures of an economic interest in a municipal contract or business. And the board would entertain a motion to approve these disclosures of an economic interest.
So moved. And seconded.
And any discussion? And I'm seeing that I had the confidential agenda open, and that would be why I was having difficulty finding it. And as I looked through these, I hadn't seen any cause for concern. Did any other members of the board have any economic interest disclosures that they felt warranted individual discussion?
None for myself.
Daniel, could you restate your question, please? I didn't quite understand. What are you asking?
If there were any of the disclosures on this evening's consent agenda that any member wanted to have individual discussion on.
No, although I do want to just as a point of interest, just mention that it's, unless you read carefully, it's difficult sometimes to distinguish the two agendas. And if I'm correctly, yeah, I mean, these are the, I don't want to misspeak and mention something that's on the confidential agenda, but
So
on the non-confidential items, these are all ASD the ASD employees that are disclosed, correct?
Right.
A through items, consent agenda A through D, and they look fine to me.
And I think that that's the prevailing theme here. And without any further discussion on these 4 items, I suppose our motion is to approve this evening's consent agenda. And we have a second and no further discussion. And with that, all those in favor of approving this evening's consent agenda, say aye.
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 And with none opposed, the motion carries, and this evening's consent agenda is approved. Our next item for consideration is unfinished business, where we have at item 6A, a request for an advisory opinion 2024-02, and at B, a request for advisory opinion 2024-04. The board would entertain a motion. I think we'll likely address first item 6A.
So moved.
Seconded.
And discussion on item 6A. Just as quickly as I can flip to the correct page.
Just a point of clarification, Chair.
Yes.
You're referring to item 6A. Item 6 in the non-confidential agenda is unfinished business. There's no sub-item under unfinished business.
Let me make sure I'm looking at the right version of our agenda then.
There's a, or maybe I'm looking at the wrong one.
So we should have I believe a shorter agenda that's our confidential, and then a 31-page agenda that is our non-confidential.
I've got 31-page non-confidential and 8-page confidential.
That seems accurate. So my expectation was we would have the request for advisory opinion at 6A and B in our non-confidential.
I've got that reversed on 6A and B. They're in the confidential agenda. There's a 6A and B, request for advisory opinion 2024-02 and 2024-04 under unfinished business. And that's in the confidential agenda that was sent out today at 10:15 a.m.
Okay, and if Ms. Sleppy could clarify, my impression here was that the only confidential business we had was at 7A, an ethics complaint.
Yes, that is correct. This should be what's in your packet.
So I think we might just have a version control issue then.
Okay, well, that's why I'm trying to be very careful about what I say, because I don't want to discuss something confidential that is on the wrong agenda.
Yeah, and so I know specifically for 2024-04, confidentiality was waived, and I believe that's the case for 02 as well.
Yes, that's correct. For both of these advisory opinions, confidentiality was waived.
So we can proceed with item 6 outside of confidentiality, and then we'll need to go confidential for item 7.
Okay.
So, Chair, to clarify things, what we're basically right now is Paul wrote a a reply for us, correct?
That's correct, and that
A
should be
response for us,
at page
and that's what we should be
15.
reviewing right now.
That's correct.
I move that we accept the response to the request of advisory opinion 2024-02 as written.
And a second?
Second.
And any discussion? And pardon while I retrieve my paper notes here. I don't recall if I had any. Okay, so I had no concerns here either. Is there any further discussion on accepting the proposed response to advisory opinion 2024-02 as written? And hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of accepting this advisory opinion as written, say aye.
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 And with no votes opposed, the motion carries and response to advisory opinion 2402 is accepted as written.
So moved.
So we have that one moved and carried to accept 02. Next item on our agenda is 2024-04. And I'm interpreting that as moving consideration on 04?
Yes.
Okay. And is there a second?
I'll second it.
And any discussion on the long form response, not the expedited response? So I believe that this is going to be our response beginning at page 24 of the non-confidential agenda for advisory opinion 2024-04.
I have no issues with it. It's a good.
Daniel, this is Paul. If I could just bring up one point that I was kind of thinking about. So, first of all, kind of apologize for all the versions that I sent out and all the packages that we had to revise. I was just kind of trying to be responsive as things were occurring in the assembly meetings and stuff and keep it up to date. But just reading it, I'm wondering if it's a little bit too critical unnecessarily of Ms. Johnson. And I was going to suggest maybe on page 29 of the opinion, if you can go to the top of that paragraph, there's a section there where I said, it would be prudent for her and Henning to develop some recusal procedures for the contracts that she worked on in the future. And maybe we could just leave end that paragraph on that note and delete the rest of those sentences. That was just kind of responding to, when she was telling the board that we kind of needed more training, or she wasn't aware of any of these ethical rules, that she never agreed to anything. So I don't know, that kind of just struck me wrong that, she's one of the most senior executives in the municipality. She probably should have been aware of them. But I don't think that the board necessarily needs to get into that. So I don't know, maybe it could be left in as is, or maybe just delete that section.
And I certainly appreciate that input, and I can see here where this draft touches on explain the reason, hadn't done so, wasn't aware, through, and maybe that last little bit, the claim of ignorance rings somewhat hollow. I think I see your point.
Yeah, maybe I let too much emotions dictate that sentence, but I was going to suggest just deleting that there's no need to really get into that and take sides in that dispute.
May I make a suggestion?
Absolutely.
Just to rather than delete that whole section from the point noted to the end of the paragraph, I would simply delete. If you look at the sentence beginning, however, the claims of ignorance of ethical rules rings hollow. Da da da. I'm going to suggest that we delete the clause beginning with the claim and ending considering. Just say, however, Ms. Johnson served both as the former mayor's chief of staff, and continue to the end of the paragraph. I think it is healthy just to remind, but maybe just taking out that clause to soften it somewhat. I mean, there's no, the board is not, there's no, punishment in this letter, but I think that buys us a little space to make a healthy admonition, and it could be tempered just a little by taking that out and still just recognizing that she was the former mayor's chief of staff, and you ought to know these things. So I would just take, I would move that we just take out that clause.
So the motion is to strike at page 29, paragraph 1, the sentence beginning with however, the language reading that claim, or the claim of ignorance, through the words case considering preceding Ms. Johnson. So the sentence then reads, however, Ms. Johnson served both as the former mayor's chief of staff, and continues with the sentence.
Yes, I mean, the sentence works if you just excise that clause.
And do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, and any further discussion on that? I suppose we call that an amendment then?
Yeah.
And no further discussion on that amendment? And with that, the amendment is to the motion to accept the advisory opinion as drafted, with the exception of deleting the language in the first paragraph on page 29, beginning with the claim and ending with case considering. All those in favor say aye.
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 And hearing none opposed, the amendment carries. And is there any further discussion on the underlying motion to approve this advisory opinion?
Chair, if I could just bring up one part as far as like using Miss Johnson's name. I know that was kind of a concern in prior board opinions where, because the requester is the municipal attorney and they waive confidentiality, but there's still the admonition in the code to respect the identity of witnesses who have requested anonymity. In the past, so we reached out to Miss Johnson and she did not respond. So she did not request anonymity, or I asked her if she wanted her name redacted in the opinion and she didn't get back to us. So I guess it would still be the board's decision on whether to leave her name in there as is or to like redact it and use either initials or just her title or something like that. I think the most similar prior circumstance was when the ombudsman requested an advisory opinion dealing with the actions of the former HR director. And in that case, I know the board decided to leave his name in the opinion because it was a matter of somewhat, public interest, and he had not requested anonymity. So I guess that's my recommendation, is just to leave it as is. But if the board was concerned, I think especially with softening the language there a little bit so it doesn't seem like it's as critical of her, there still could be, the board would be within its rights if it wanted to redact her name out as well. So that would be something to consider, but I guess that's why it's drafted as is, leaving the names in.
And I
I'd
think
move
just
sorry.
And I guess my thought on that is that this is a very fact specific, and I think anyone who's involved in this workspace would be either acutely aware or would be able to readily identify who it is. So I'm less concerned than I might be in other circumstances. I don't feel strongly one way or the other, but I think that given the subject matter, there isn't as strong of an imperative as there might be in other situations.
Yeah, Chair, I would move that we place a name for position.
And I do apologize. I had you kind of cut out a little bit towards the end there.
Sorry about that. I would move, Chair, that we would replace the name with the position.
And do we have a second?
Second.
And is there any further discussion on the amendment to replace Ms. Johnson's name with the position? And seeing and hearing none, the motion is to amend the underlying motion to accept the advisory opinion as written, subject to the prior amendment, by replacing Ms. Johnson's name herein with with her position. All of those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Aye. And with none opposed, the motion carries.
Chair, just in making these redactions, I was just going to ask for clarification because I know like some of the sentences are going to be hard to write, referring to her title all the time. Is it okay to like redact and use initials, or I know that sometimes the concern is we just don't want somebody to Google her name 10 years from now and be able to find it. Of course, everybody's going to know who it is if they research it far enough, but so is it okay to use her initials sometimes in some of the sentences, or just not use any names whatsoever?
I think I would defer to the maker of the motion to amend on that point.
Okay, I would amend that we replace the name with initials or title as applicable.
And I think that since that's just a clarification, we might not need a whole vote on that, right?
Chair, is there
Yes.
a motion open on the floor right now?
So we had our motion to amend to effectively anonymize this to the extent possible, and that carried. I don't believe we have a motion open on the floor right now.
Okay, I would like to move to give stylistic discretion to the chair in replacing Ms. Johnson's name.
And is there a second?
Chair, I had a motion that's open. I'm sorry. Did you not hear my motion?
Sorry, I did not.
Yeah, I made an amendment to my motion that was open regarding the change of her name to to either initials or to title as applicable. Was that not heard? I apologize if it didn't come through.
No, that would have been completely on me. I think I had heard that and interpreted it as just offering clarification on your prior motion. So,
well, you had asked for the person that made the motion, so I amended the motion. So I think that was an open motion that I amended, and it's ready for a second.
Okay.
Second.
And any further discussion?
Yes. Patrick, would you be comfortable with giving the chair stylistic discretion? So I mean, rather than, I mean, one size might not fit all here, and in some cases,
That's
some
fine.
stylistic discretion might be warranted to let him clean up the letter rather than us try to edit it here on the fly in this meeting.
Yeah, yeah, that's the purpose there. That's what I did.
Okay,
that was
well
my
then,
interpretation of that is that as applicable, Paul could go over and make the change. My big thing is, Paul, is that I don't want somebody 5 years from now when she's applying for a job pick this up and have it look like, and to have it cause an issue for her.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's kind of what Becky had mentioned before too, that, anybody's going to be able to figure out who it is, but as long as somebody's Googling her, in the future, they're not going to find her name.
Right.
gentlemen, I think we all agree in spirit. What I would just request that we defeat this amendment and replace it with amendment that just gives the chair stylistic discretion in that regard.
I would say not the chair, but how about Paul? Because Paul's writing, right?
So
Yeah, but the letter is I mean, I believe that the chair is the one who sends the letter on behalf of the board, or not. Maybe I'm incorrect.
I go as far as putting my signature on it. My impression here would be that we would be able to have Paul make revisions and revisions that are stylistic and not substantive. We or you could give me stylistic discretion to approve non-substantive changes that Paul makes and then have this appropriately distributed after.
So moved.
Second. Well, wait, we have to defeat the First Amendment.
It has not
So-
been approved. It's been seconded, so it's an
I
amendment.
seconded it, and that's why we're discussing it right now, Patrick.
So I think that the easy solution here, it looked like Patrick made that motion. I think we can fairly interpret that as withdrawing the original motion. So we have a new motion and we have a second, right?
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so the motion is for Paul to anonymize and stylistic discretion with the chair. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of this motion, please say aye.
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 Aye. And with no opposition, the motion to amend the underlying motion to have Paul anonymize Ms. Johnson's name out of this draft and to give the chair stylistic discretion on the non-substantive issue of anonymizing it carries. And as my final note, the only remaining issue I saw was a typo that's been removed in the drafts. So I have no further discussion on our ultimate motion to approve the advisory opinion. And is there any further discussion on the underlying motion? Seeing and hearing none, the motion is to approve the advisory opinion subject to our two amendments passed this evening. All those in favor say aye.
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 And with none opposed, the motion carries, and subject to the two amendments this evening, the advisory opinion for 2024-04 is approved. And Ms. Sleppy, I believe this now puts us into the confidential agenda. Is that accurate?
Yes, Chair, you are at item 7A, which is a confidential complaint.
All right, and the board would entertain a motion to take up item 7A.
So moved.
Second.
And Ms. Sleppy, I believe with that well, do we need the vote on the motion to take it up to go into a private session, or?
Yes, Chair, you'll need a motion to be moved to go into executive session.
Move
Very
to
good.
go into executive session.
I
Second.
appreciate. And is there any discussion? Seeing and hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 And with none opposed, the board will proceed into a closed session for consideration of item 7A.
Chair, we happen to be having some technical difficulties with the rooms function, so Jasmine Akers sent out a executive session link, so we'll have to leave this meeting and go into that one. Patrick, it
I don't
said your
have that
mail.
link.
Okay, yeah, it said your mailbox is full. Is there a better email to send it to?
That it should be full. I mean, I'm getting emails all day from everybody else, so
It just came in.
let's see if I.
And we sent it
Let
to
me
both
see.
your emails, so Patrick, so.
Let's
But
see.
yeah, you'll have to leave this one and join the other one because otherwise it won't work, and then come back into this one when we leave executive session.
I don't have an email from you there. Just a second to check something else here.
Patrick, I just got mine just a second ago.
Got mine as well.
I'm not getting one.
Maybe hit refresh.
Yeah, not there. Let's see something here. Huh. I don't know what to say. Is there a phone number I can dial into?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to get that to you with it being confidential.
Let's see here. What's going on here? It's very strange. Emails. One second. Let me try something here. Just give me one moment. I know I'm having problems with the things are not.
If everyone else would like to close this meeting out and join the other one, and then we'll get Patrick figured out. That'd be helpful.
All right, go ahead and jump into the other meeting then.
I might have it here in just a moment. Just give me a moment here to. Patrick Teagarden. Awesome. I don't know what's going on with email. It's like it's just dead. Can you hear me now? Weird. Thank you.
One second, Chair. Patrick, would you be able to leave the other team's meeting? We're getting some feedback.
Okay.
All right, Chair, you are in open session.
Thank you. And so in our executive session, the board had heard a motion to table consideration of item 7A to our next regular scheduled meeting and invite the complainant and respondent of that issue to participate in that meeting, and that motion carried, tabling item 7A to our next meeting. Our next item this evening is item 7B, and that is an update to notice of intent to respond to public solicitation by a public servant form. And the board would entertain a motion.
Oh, sorry, Chair, before we go on to that next item, Carissa, did I understand? So in executive session, I don't think motions are supposed to be made and voted on. So I think the intent was that you would come back into the open session and then make the motion here. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's correct. I should have just did that.
Excellent. And so the motion was to table discussion of item 7A to the next meeting and invite our complainant and respondent to participate at our next scheduled meeting. And the board would entertain that motion.
So moved.
Second.
And is there any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And with none opposed, item 7A is tabled to our next scheduled meeting, and complainant and respondent are invited to participate in that meeting. And now we're prepared to move on with 7B.
Move to consider item 7B.
I'll second it.
And is there any discussion on item 7B?
Chair, I was just going to kind of explain the differences in the form. So what we're asking is for the Board of Ethics to approve this new form for use in the future. And this was motivated by the chair's question a couple months ago that, you know, the old form had a $15 filing fee. That was just kind of a historical relic that they used to have to publish these in the newspaper. So they left that filing fee on there, but of course now they're published online and there really was no need for that. So we were just eliminating that filing fee. The only real changes to the form, up in block 3, we put a title or put their job title up there because we'd get a lot of forms that would be, you know, it'd say ASD related services or something like that. And I didn't know what that was. Like, just explain what it is that you do so we know, you know, for example, there was like a speech teacher that her husband was an architect and was going to bid on a contract. You know, obviously as a speech therapist, she has no ability to influence that contract. But if you just explain that, then it makes it easier for those to be approved. And then block 4 was the wording of that was changed slightly just so that we could make it better for them to, like, you click one of the boxes. Basically, you got to click one of them to let us know what whether you have the ability to influence the contract or not. And then the signature page was changed because the code says that can be signed either by the ethics officer or reviewed by the Board of Ethics. So what we did is we took out the supervisor's signature in that block. For example, some of these cases, you know, you had somebody their husband wants to bid on a snow contract and they're like a substitute teacher for a different school. You know, there's clearly no conflict or no situation that could involve a conflict. There's no need to send that to the supervisor and try and get the principal's signature on that form. It's just holding it up and wasting time. So we deleted that. It's not required by the code. And then some of these can be time sensitive too. Like if they want to bid on a contract that's coming up within the next week and the board isn't scheduled, to meet for another month or so. The majority of these in the future would be signed by either me or Joe Busa as the ethics officer. And it would only be, if there was a legitimate conflict or something that needed to be brought to the board, that it would go to the Board of Ethics. So the signature block was changed a little bit too, but that's really the only changes on this form. So we're just asking the board to review it and then approve this form to be used in the future.
And I will say, just looking at the form as presented today, it seems like this will come through a little bit clearer on, on future agendas as we're seeing new notices of intent coming through, that it'll be more clear who it is that's doing what and what the potential conflict, if any, is, right?
Right. Yeah. What needs to be clear on these forms is like how does their job position relate to what's under consideration? Because a lot of times they're just totally unrelated. And if they make that clear, then we can just get these approved a lot quicker.
And is there, any further discussion on the approval of the proposed notice of intent to respond to public solicitation by a public servant? Seeing and hearing no further discussion, I believe we had a open motion to consider this. I believe procedurally our path forward would be withdrawing the motion to consider and bring a motion to accept this if that's the board's intent.
So moved.
Seconded.
And is there any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, the motion is to accept the proposed document as drafted. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And with none opposed, the notice of intent to respond to public solicitation by a public servant form is approved as drafted. Our next item on this evening's agenda is item 8, member comments. Have we any comments of the members? And anything from Patrick or otherwise? I'm sorry, I said Patrick, I very much meant Paul.
No, I didn't have anything else.
All right. Seeing and hearing none, our next item this evening is audience participation. And I do not see any members of the public in our hall this evening. Our next meeting is scheduled for November 21st. Sorry about that. November 21st, 2024 from 7 o'clock p.m. to 8:30 p.m. And finally, the board would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
And is there any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 And the motion carries. Board of Ethics is adjourned at 4:45 p.m.